an odd video I decided to do. I wanted to look up the origin story for "You Can't Hit the Broadside of a Barn." What is the broadside of a barn? Now, if you're not aware of barn shapes, the most common barn that's usually depicted or written about or whatever may not be what you're thinking. We have to find out when this expression first came out. Now, until 1900 whatever, it was applied almost exclusively to shooting or throwing an object at somebody. But after 1900, it got applied to baseball players. And it's from 1852 June issue of New York's Yankee Notions on page 164 at the bottom of column 1 and referred to poorly aiming a gun. So we have to look up pre-1850s New York State rectangular floor plan, single level barn designs in order to find this. Now, what's the standard height for a barn? And we're talking about a wall or the roof too. This would refer to a flat surface being fired upon, treating it like a target, or showing that you can hit it. They don't specify the distance here. So I'm going to bring up a couple of examples that would fit these supposed dimensions. The floor plans that are listed are fairly large numbers, like 50 foot by 50 foot square box barns, pole barns, 30 foot by 40 foot English barns, and New World Dutch barns. Now, because it's New York, the most common ones are going to be English barns, New England barns, and New World Dutch barns. Well, the width of it could be up to 40 to 50 feet, so let's just use that as a first number. What about the height of the wall? We're not talking about hitting the roof, and we're not hitting the end bits that are that weird barn shape. We're talking about the broadside, the actual wide broadside of a barn. Everything I can look up indicates that would be what you're referring to. It wouldn't be some other part of it. And we are assuming that if you're saying the broadside of a barn, it's not some trapezoidal weird thing. It's going to be a squarish or rectangular shape. Let's talk about the width being 40 feet. Let's make it somewhat small target. And what was the height of them? One of the most common numbers you see come up is 12 feet and 13 feet. Okay, we'll use that as our vertical error angle. And, well, most shooting accuracy tests aren't based on shooting a target that's a foot away. And they're usually based on several different distances. One of the most common ones that's used for measuring accuracy of a firearm or accuracy of a shooter is a 100-yard shot. And it's conceivable you could miss by 13 feet at 100 yards. That's 300 feet. If there were any other dimensions mentioned, someone would say so, but they're not mentioning distance. Now, a practical idea of this is that you want to make sure a target does not take up more than a certain amount of field of view, otherwise you can't find the center of it. I looked up the logic and visual cortex requirements for having a target to aim at, and this comes up a lot when you're thinking of, well, where do I aim at a target? Unless you know where to shoot, you shoot to the center. What's the largest field of view you can actually see? And I found out you'd have to be, whatever the width is and the height, whatever the biggest dimension is, it has to be far enough away that you would be able to understand it. So you'd put your hands out from, let's say, an eye, and you work out the distance, and you work out an actual number set based on how far away you are from it needing to be, so you can actually see the whole target easily to be able to find the center of it. This is actually something that they base on the idea that you need to back away from, let's say, anything you're evaluating enough of a distance to where it takes up the main focal area of your... Basically, if you put your arm out and you have your hand width, the back of your hand, at arm width, that's, let's say, 6 inches wide, 4 inches wide, whatever, at a distance of around a meter from your face. Well, what's the equivalent for, well, a barn equivalent is about 100 yards. It actually kind of works out that way. Not for the width of it, but for, doing the math for what would be within the range. It would not be less than, let's say, 50 yards, for instance, let's say. So we'll put it at 100 yards and do that. So to miss a 13-foot tall wall on the broadside of a barn and hit the roof or hit the dirt, that's another way of missing, not just right or left. In fact, right or left is almost never considered. I mean, you can, but not very likely. At 100 yards away, this would be 156 minutes of vertical angle error you would have to have minimum before you could actually miss the broadside of a barn. Now, this is also like something you can scale down to a much smaller number. We have some numbers to work with, like 13 feet tall and 40 feet wide. This would be the equivalent to a 13-inch tall and 40-inch wide target at 23 feet, or a 3-foot by 1-foot target at 23 feet or 21 feet. The same dimensions you use for a self-defense distance human torso impact from the top of the head to the crotch bottom and the width of your shoulders, minus the area where you have no vital impact points. Yeah, at self-defense distance, everybody out there who's ever done any training on the subject, and anybody who's watched police miss somebody 12 times in a row, knows that missing the broadside of the barn is the equivalent to missing a human target at 23 feet that you're supposed to do for learning self-defense with a firearm. Which is, in case some of you don't know, unless you actually put some effort into it, is pretty easy to do under stress. But without stress, virtually everybody can hit pretty much any part of a target they want to without any training, as long as the gun will fire when they pull the trigger that one shot. 90% of the population can hit in the T-box, between the eye sockets and the mouth, top of the mouth to the top of the nose section and the eye sockets, which would be considered an expert shot. Most people can hit that the first time with a pistol without actually knowing how it works. They just instinctively aim. Some people can do it shooting from the hip. But to miss at that distance something as broad as a human being and as tall as a human being from top of head to the groin, that's a 3 by 1 foot failure at 23 feet approximately, broadside of a barn at 100 yards. It's just that instead of it being tilted over, wide angle, this is a human being. Obviously, it's much worse than that here, if you consider only the vertical angle. But yeah, to miss the broadside of a barn would be the equivalent to not being able to throw something at or shoot a human at 23 feet. So yeah, broadside of a barn reference here for aiming a firearm. Maybe it was based on shooting a barn and hitting it at 100 yards and somehow missing it anyway. But anyway, this is from the 1850s, New York State, and I looked up a surprisingly difficult thing to look up, and this is the reason for the rest of the video. Looking up the dimensions for really old barns that are on American history references and historic place registers. One of the things you'll find is the people who put up information about them refuse to tell you how big they are. The size of any of the components. They'll tell you the dimensions of the beams, and a few places actually get to the point and give you the information. Link below in the description. The one that is most common in New York is called a Dutch barn, New World Dutch barn, or whatever. And it's a variation on a pole barn. And it is literally a 40 or 50 foot wide wall that's about 13 feet tall in average. But I only found that when I looked up some random .orgs. And most of them had so many problems with them and they were so poorly maintained that my browser refused to open them, and I had to make an archive of them and read the archive, and I gave up on most of them. You can also look up Google Books telling you about the references I'm using, including the first utterance of, you can't hit the broadside of a barn. But now we know it's 13 by 40 feet, and if we're assuming 100 yards, it's equivalent to missing a human being if you're shooting at them at, 23 feet or 7 paces. How many paces was it in the Old West? Don't know. Anyway, it's an 1850's reference. So there we are. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. And yes, it's very difficult to look up dimensions for any of these barns. For some reason, that's something that a lot of the websites keep secret. If you know why, please tell me in the down below in the comment section.